Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Mona Sobhani and you're listening to Your Superior Self.
Mona, thank you for taking the time. I cannot wait to talk to you tonight. This is quite fascinating, actually, because I found your book in a catalog of a publisher that I work with. And I saw the title and I saw your credentials, and I was like, I have to have her on the show. So, with that said, thank you for joining. And can you give everyone kind of like a quick rundown of your credentials and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I love having these conversations. I never get tired of them. So, um, yeah, I am a cognitive neuroscientist. I have a PhD in neuroscience from University of Southern California. I studied neuroscience in undergraduate. Also, I've always loved the brain. I stayed in academia after my PhD. I did a post-doctoral fellowship at Vanderbilt University looking at law and neuroscience with the MacArthur Foundation. And then I moved into learning about business and venture capital. So I went to UCLA to do that for a bit. And then I missed research. So I went back to University of Southern California where I got my PhD to join a digital health center to kind of take those behavioral cognitive neuroscience skills that I had and translate them into tech applications. So doing research with apps and wearables, measuring physiological and behavioral signals, trying to predict like health and behavior. So that's my normal professional background.
How do you go from this traditionally trained materialistic, empirical, observational, systematic scientist to writing? I've seen your website. You have a large number of publications that range from law to health tech to a large range of things. And then now you've written this book, and it's titled, what is it titled? It's titled Proof of Spiritual Phenomena.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. The publisher chose the title, by the way. I was using that title.
Well, scientists would never use the word proof.
No, never. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, what happens is that essentially my worldview, which was defined for me by the scientific materialist paradigm that that most of Western society subscribes to, just wasn't working out for me. Although it's easy to say that now, I didn't realize that that's what was happening. But I had an existential crisis, essentially. Over it started in 2019, I think, is when it really, and the funny thing is with these kinds of things is it's going on for a while, but you don't realize it until it slaps you in the face. And you look back and you're like, oh, actually, I was struggling for quite a while and I wasn't happy. I just didn't know it. And so in 2019 is really when it came into my awareness in a really profound way because of a series of life events that just made me realize how profoundly unhappy I was. And it was a dark night of the soul, as everyone says, like just a very dark place. And I've always been a very optimistic, outgoing, extroverted, happy person. So it was a really hard time for me because I wasn't used to that kind of those kinds of emotions, and that is kind of like existential despair. So I opened up in this space. Well, do you want should I just tell the story kind of my
Well, I just think it's fascinating. Like you said, it was already there, that existential crisis, the dark night of the soul kind of thing. Like it wasn't like, well, that's the thing, right? Like a lot of times in the research, especially like regression towards the mean kind of stuff, is where people ask for help when they're at their breaking points. And then therapy usually, some people say, well, regression towards the mean, people get therapy and then they go back to where they were. I don't see any regression towards the mean in this story. Like you were at a breaking point and you started going down this existential curiosity exploration journey, the hero's journey, that Joe Campbell would call it. And it seems like you're running full force with that. So yeah, definitely tell me, like, so what I love, we had a call earlier and we talked about your path a little bit, and we really resonated quite a bit on a lot of different subjects. But what really grabbed my attention, especially in the book, was when we started talking about your mom's gift of
Yeah.
reading Armenian coffee. I don't know, however you put that, but Armenian coffee readings.
Yeah.
I think that
So
was that the trigger? Was that the?
yes. So I guess the initiation of my opening to this was that. So I lived in cognitive dissonance, right, a little bit, because I was a scientist. Science was my religion, as I like to say. I totally bought into it. By the time you come out of graduate school, if you're trained properly, especially in neuroscience, you believe that all meaning is created from the human brain, that there's no external meaning in the world, that everything is created, that you detect coincidences, that it's all in your head. So if I had any inkling of romanticism or spirituality before I went to grad school, by the time I left, it was all gone. Because I think I was trained properly. And so, but at home, I'm Persian. My parents are from Iran. In our culture, as in many other Middle Eastern cultures, and I'm sure a lot of other cultures around the world, we use divination practices or some people in the culture use divination practices to foretell the future, or also to intuit things that are going on currently in a person's life. And my grandmother was allegedly very skilled in this. I only met her twice in my life because she lived in Iran. And I was young when she passed away, so I never got to have a reading from her. But my mom inherited the skills, and everybody would come to our house, and at family parties, everyone always wanted her to read for them. And it was just one of those things in the family that you don't notice, or it's in the background. I never paid attention to it. I never believed in it. And especially, as I went through grad school, and it's actually interesting because the more I got trained to externally say I don't believe, or all meanings created in the brain, actually during grad school is when my mom started. We started having coffee every Sunday, and she would read my coffee for me, and I started taking notes because just first of all, I wouldn't be able to remember once it was over. So I was like, let me start taking notes. And then I started noticing that a lot of what she said came true, not everything, but a lot of it, to the point where, I kind of got, just like my friends would argue over who could come over on Sunday to get their cup read. I just realized it was actually kind of reliable in certain ways. And so I looked forward to it every Sunday. And she really gave insight about, she would know details that were just not possible. And as I went through grad school, and learned statistics too, it just became more and more crazy to me that she could possibly, how could she possibly know these very specific small details about things in my life that there's no way she could know about. There's things we don't share with our parents. I didn't live with her. There are just things she couldn't have known. And yeah, so over that, I lived in this cognitive dissonance of over grad school, if you asked me, I would have told you I don't believe in it, and I would have said meanings created in the brain. But experientially, I was I guess secretly but it wasn't even, I wasn't consciously aware of it, but I every Sunday went for my readings, and it was her predictions of a few certain events that happened beginning in 2016 that were so significant in my life, and she saw them so far in advance and with such specific detail that made me certain that this was a real phenomenon, that even though we didn't understand in science, we didn't have a model for it, that it's real. I don't know what to tell you. So, I mean, I didn't talk about it with a lot of people. But it's interesting. I wasn't embarrassed about it the way that I would be after grad school. So like, as you go through training, and you graduate with your degree and you feel like you have a responsibility as a scientist in certain ways, to say certain things. But when I was going through the training, I remember some of my grad student friends, I would tell them, and it kind of wasn't a big deal or anything. But yeah, by the time I graduated, I would never have admitted or talked about it with anyone. So, but yeah, she was extremely accurate. And I'm like, okay, we don't understand how it works, but this is a phenomenon that for over 10 years, I've taken notes. What she says is reliable. I don't know how it's happening, but it is. So that's where it is.
So that sparked an interest, but during that time, you were very entrenched in your materialistic mindset. What was your spiritual? Was there a spiritual practice? Was there a spiritual belief? I mean, were you an atheist? Like, what did that look like at that time?
Um, I It's so funny. I wanted to be an atheist, but I was actually agnostic because I didn't believe that you could prove or disprove. Like, especially after grad school, I'm like, we don't have the tools to know our method. We have no way of knowing. There's no way we could know for sure. So I just became agnostic, even though I liked the idea of atheism. I was anti-religion, anti-spirituality. Like, I kind of was anti all that stuff. Partly because of my parents' background, coming from a country where religion took over, but also just from science. So I didn't have a spiritual practice at all, and I didn't want to believe in anything. And that was another reason I think I found it very difficult to accept fully or talk about the coffee readings, because or why they perplexed me so, because what does that mean? That you can tell the future,
Sure.
and my mom would say things like, she's spiritual, she's not religious, but she's spiritual. So she would say things like, oh, there's some once in a blue moon, she would say something like, there's an angel helping you. Okay. Or she would say things like, oh, this is in his fate or something. And she would say things like that. And then I would like question her, like, wait, what do you mean? There's angels? Like, what do you mean by fate? But the interesting thing is she just kind of, I've come to learn it's like she's channeling. So it's not like she's always thinking of what she says. And it's not like she can explain it to you. She just chooses the most appropriate word available to her at the time. And so she can never answer my questions. Like, I would be like, is there fate? Is there destiny? Is there free will? Is there a God? Are there angels? And she would kind of dance around it, because she's like, I don't know. Like, no one knows, but she would be like, this is what I see in the cup.
Sure. That's interesting. That's so interesting. I think a lot of psychics, I think a lot of tea leaf readers, Armenian coffee readers, I think they're using that technique as a tool to access higher levels of consciousness. And the reason why I say higher levels of consciousness is not necessarily because it's a higher level of consciousness, but because we can't understand it. Like, we can't comprehend it within our reality. It's like the cell in our bodies can't really it doesn't have the concept of what we are as a body, right? Like the overall, like, gigantic picture of it. So when I say higher, it's like outside of us, because I can't really comprehend that, right? But I can explore that. And by just researching, the topics that you've researched, I can see the larger consciousness system. I can see the, universal source, and experience it through like little experiments, like the things that you've done. But your mom, I think, has an ability to use that technique as a tool to access that and receive information from a higher consciousness system that gives us kind of like I don't know, maybe it's destiny. I don't know. Maybe it's predestined. I don't know. But with free will in the play there in the mix, I think there's so many different things that can, so many different variables that can change an outcome. But, you talked specifically in one about one reading where she was like pretty, I don't know. She was dancing around it pretty much, but it involved death.
Yes. Yeah. So that was one of the events. So there was this event, I'll talk about it right now. That I didn't act on it afterward, but I consider it one of the life-changing events. So it was, yeah, for weeks in advance, she kept seeing something, very bad. And she at first didn't say anything. And then finally one week she's like, okay, this keeps coming up. I feel like I have to warn you. I'll never forget it. She said, I feel like I have to warn you. And she's never said anything like that before. So of course, like my heart dropped. I was like, oh my God, like, what is this going to be? But she was like, it keeps coming up. And the more it comes up, like the more times it comes up in coffee readings, the more likely it is to happen. Yeah, she just warned me, like, you're going to get some very bad news. And she wouldn't tell me what it was. And, so of course I was trying to get it out of her. She wouldn't tell me. But for like 5 weeks after, and she had already been seeing it for a while. And for 5 weeks, every week, she just kept seeing it and she would not tell me what it was. And she said that she didn't want to be wrong or make me unhappy before it happens, because what if it doesn't happen, and whatnot. And so I just lived in this constant state, because by this point I knew this was past, I was out of grad school, this was in 2016. At this point I knew she was pretty good, and so I had faith in them, and I was pretty sure I was going to get bad news. So I kind of was like asking all my friends, I'm like, which one of you has bad news? Like I was on edge really for weeks. And then finally a friend texted me a Friday night in December and was like, I don't know if you heard, one of our professors was murdered by one of the students in our program. And it was someone I'd worked with on my dissertation, not on my committee, but someone I had designed an experiment with. So then I went back to her and told her, I called her the next day and I said, I know what it is. And she's like, what? And I said, one of my professors was killed. And she was like, yeah, it was a death. And she's like, I've never seen anything like it. So she's like, I didn't even know how to explain it to you. She's like, I knew it was a death. She's like, but I knew it was exceptional, like violent. Or, like something like that, but she didn't know how to interpret it because she'd never seen anything like it before. Which is the other interesting thing about, she says she interprets the symbols, like she learned what they mean from her mother, and she's since taught me. So if she sees a symbol she doesn't know, she has to guess and interpret. And it's like archetypal, so, if it's a lion, then it's somebody brave, courageous, that could be vicious, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that happened. And then, my whole, I was upset as an understatement, about the actual event, but also about how she could have possibly seen that. So it was, in my mind, I was like, so for 8 weeks, my professor was happily with his family while his death was like in my coffee cup pending. And it was like just so hard to understand that. And that's when I really kept asking her, was it his fate, was it destiny, was it and she didn't know, she didn't have an answer. So I didn't do anything with that. It occupied my mind, but nothing actually happened, except I got very curious about these topics, but I didn't research. I didn't do anything with it because I was very busy at the time with a new job and overwhelmed and working long hours. So I didn't do anything. And then it wasn't until 2018, 2 years later, when she predicted, with crazy accuracy, this romantic relationship that came into my life, but she had the outcome wrong. And we've since we think she got too invested, which is another thing readers will tell you, like if you're too close to the situation, you can't read properly, because your emotions get in the way, and they can cloud your perception or your judgment or your interpretation of what you're receiving. But in any case, I was, upset that relationship fell apart, even though obviously in hindsight, I think it was the right thing. But I was upset it fell apart, and then I was upset that she was wrong. And I couldn't understand how she was so normally right, how she could be wrong. And then I was like, I had kind of a crisis of are we wrong? Did we create meaning out of all of this? Is there no fate or destiny, or did something change? And, like, I felt like the, rug was pulled out from under me, or like my whole world just pulled, because in some way the coffee made me feel like I had control or a sense of what was coming always. And this just blew that. And this was the event that, it was like, I kind of think of it like my life was a can of gasoline that had already spilled, and it was just waiting for one thing to, and this was like the lit match that was like, no, nothing is fine. You're not happy with anything, but you're not realizing it. You're not awake, And so, yeah, after this happened, yeah, I just looked around and I was like, I'm not happy, but why? Like, I have so much of what I thought I wanted. Like, why am I so not happy? And the whole fate destiny thing is what launched me on the spiritual journey, kind of by accident. Like, my friends were like, let's go to a psychic, heartbroken. And so we went to a psychic, and I was like, I've never been to a psychic. Are these people for real? Like, and of course there's that cognitive dissonance again, like my mom does it, but I'm still viewing other psychics as fraudulent, because that's the narrative in our society. But we went, and I was like, oh no, they're really good too. Like, a lot of what they said was crazy accurate and not vague at all, very specific, like the time frames they would give for things that there's no way they could know. We did this for over a year. My friends and I would go and compare notes, like kind of a pseudo experiment. And then that's when I learned about that, all of the psychics would talk about karma and reincarnation and consciousness, and other dimensions and things like that. And I remember just being like, okay, whatever. I don't care about that. Like, I just want to know like what's going to happen in my life.
I want to know about me.
Yeah, I want to know about me. But like, I heard what they said, but when you don't have an understanding of framework in your mind, this is like a well-known phenomenon. Like, it bounces off your brain. You hear it, but it doesn't stick because you don't have a place for it in your brain. So it just bounced off me. I wrote it down in my notes. And then it wasn't until a few months later, in 2019, towards the end of 2019, I was listening to Chelsea Handler's podcast, and she had a psychic medium on, Laura Lynn Jackson, and she told the framework, like she explained it. She's like, we reincarnate, we learn lessons, we have soul groups. And I was like, wait, I've heard this before. Where have I heard this before? Oh, it was the psychic readings. And so I just kind of listened, and, but the scientist in me was like, this is like, how come I've never heard of this? This is ridiculous. This can't be true. I totally didn't believe it, but because I'd heard it before, I listened. And because it related to me in my psychic readings, I was like, let me go get those notes. Let me see which of these relationships was karmic. And so, but I didn't really believe in it. But on the podcast, they mentioned a book, Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss, which he's a psychiatrist. It was a case study of a patient and how he was a normal psychiatrist and just stumbled on past lives in the 80s with this one patient. And I ordered the book not knowing what it was about. I thought, a psychiatrist case study. I had no idea it was about past life regression. And when I got it and read it, it was the third time that the spiritual framework was in the book. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And I really started to pay attention. And because he was an atheist, he was well-trained, went to Columbia, went to Yale Medical School. I was a science snob. I wouldn't have believed any other person writing a book. Like, it had to come from somebody like myself, somebody science trained and an atheist, for me to give it the time of day. And so that was like the third time I was being presented with this framework, and it was from someone that seemed trustworthy. But of course, I'm a scientist, so I thought, okay, this book was interesting, but kind of nuts, because he talks about like spirits. But so then I went to look into the literature. And that was like the entry into the like rabbit hole, down the rabbit hole I went. Like I went to read all the literature on past life regression, which led me to transpersonal psychology and psychedelics. And then all of the psychic research that was done by the US government. And then I started reaching out to people to interview them because it wasn't even supposed to be a project. I just wanted to know, I just wanted to know what people believed and if they believed in any of this stuff. Because even though I read so much evidence, it's so hard to overturn a belief system, a worldview.
Yeah.
Like it was so hard. I mean, and I think finally I've turned a corner, but I still have days where I'm like, I don't know, did I fall for this? Did I fall for, like, am I being stupid? Like it's just so hard to overcome beliefs. So yeah, I went on this long journey, and that's what the book is about, is everything I learned. It's my transitioning from like a total skeptic to just becoming more open-minded, which and then I went from extreme suffering, despair, existential despair, wishing I wasn't alive, to like finding some peace, which I realized I never really had before, ever. Like I thought I was happy, but looking back, you can see I was superficially happy, but I was never fulfilled. Anyway.
Even with all the credentials and the Ph.D, like, that's interesting because like, that goes to show that it's not about the check marks, right? It's about actually, I think it's the path of finding ourself, right? Like that, what Maslow talks about, the self-actualization, right? There's so much that I resonate with in that, what you just said, right? Like, there are days where like I still, we get so narrowly focused on our moments of like in the mission of what we're trying to achieve, that we forget about taking a step back and being in the moment, like fully like present in the moment, to kind of expand your lens a little bit to see the overall picture. I don't know if we ever live in that space of like, that superior self, that place where we draw inspiration, like in meditation, right? Like when you're in that quiet space, and I feel like that's when you're drawing from that higher consciousness, or that source that you are, that the near-death experiences, the past life regressions, all of that space in between lives talks about, where you're with your spirit guides, or you're that actualized higher awareness. Like I don't know if we as human beings live in that space just because of our condition as being human beings. I think it is, and in my meditation, like I'm always trying to reach that out of body state where I can explore the universe. They have a lot of literature on that that I am fascinated with, just with like remote viewing and healing and that type of modality. But in my meditation, it was like, well, why do you think you're here? Right? Like, I mean, why are you here? It's to learn. This is like, you're here for a reason, not just to get out of your body, like your consciousness out of your body, using your imagination to stretch yourself out through the cosmos and like learn from these higher beings. Like, it's about being here and evolving your consciousness into being those states of finding those states of gratitude, of being grateful for your situation, no matter what. Like if you can be grateful for whatever your life is unfolding in whatever way, like if you can be grateful for that, like that's a huge evolution for your being. Like, like try not being a dick for a day, like.
Oh, yeah, that definitely resonates with me. No, I completely agree. That's one of those, I mean, that nails actually what I'm talking about. Like the realization that I had is, yes, the degrees, I mean, whatever, all your accomplishments are nice, but it's really like, valleys and peaks, up, but then down, because it's not, it ends. Oh, I cut out for a second. Sorry about that. And then I think one of the things that I realized on this, on the spiritual side, you're right. Like on our everyday, living consciousness, we're not engaged with that kind of thing. But I did find on my journey that the more that I meditated and tried to be mindful, be present, and opened up, just literally just opening up to the possibility, I did start having experiences myself. And even though I didn't choose the title of the book, it ended up being relevant because it's like I initially was looking for scientific proof of spirituality. Like that's what I thought I needed to believe. That was the whole journey. My whole book is about, I need to find real evidence that this is real, or I can't believe in it. Evidence that I accept, like proof that I can hold in my hand and assess with my scientific training, which I did find, and I put it in the book. But what I also found was that the more you open up and engage, you get a lot of personal proof, like in your day-to-day life, having precognitive dreams or premonitions or whatever it is. When you get into that flow, I mean, the universe, kind of opens for you in that way. And then you have personal experience. And, for some people, all they need is personal experience. For some people, they only accept scientific proof. And for me, I guess I needed both.
Sure. It's all about the subjective experience, your own interpretation of like the reality that's unfolding, right? But then you talk about the cognitive science behind that, and our brain is, the capability of our brain to pick up patterns. That's what worries me a little bit, because I do believe that the universe talks to us and shows us like synchronistic signs, I've talked about this a couple times on the podcast where I'm seeing repetition in numbers, like 4 like everywhere. Like I'll look at, like I'll genuine, like not genuine. I'll out of nowhere glance at my watch and it'll be like 7:44, or I'll be driving down the highway and I'll see 3 cars with 44 in their license plates, where I'll look at my watch and it'll be 444. Like, and yes, the science says that the brain is, I think you actually called it something. What effect is that when your pattern recognition? What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, creating.
Bader mind
Oh,
half
that one. Oh,
effect.
yeah. There's that one. Yeah, where you like recently hear of something and then you start seeing it everywhere.
Yeah. Well, that freaks me out, right? But this has been happening for months, right? Like, this is like something I recently heard about. Like I've always heard about synchronicities, but like these numbers unfolding, and then like I think about it, and then okay, that's a coincidence. Oh, that's another coincidence. Oh crap, there's 5 cars that have 44 in it, right? Like my brain cannot be picking up that many cars and that in that quick, that fast of a sequence for that to be just a brain mechanism. Like it has to be something higher than myself. Like it has to be the universe, communicating with me, and that's, that to me is my subjective experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody has to find their own. And that's not just the only thing that happens, right? Like I set up little experiments and just kind of like, remote viewing, which I think is fascinating, right? Because you have evidence that supports remote viewing in your book. I'm trying not to say prove.
Right. I respect that.
I know, but we want to say that we're like, we have this evidence that was collected by blah, 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 and it supports this and it's proof, but it's like,
Yeah.
it doesn't prove anything. It just supports.
Yeah. I think I've thought about this a lot over the last 3 years, but especially the last 2 years, because what's interesting is COVID. So with COVID, so we want to believe that if you have enough evidence that comes from reputable sources, and if everyone just sees and understands the evidence, everyone will be on the same page. That's the principle we're bringing to this, right? The spiritual stuff is like, if I can just understand, like if I can have proof, then I can know. But look at COVID. COVID is a virus. We can sequence it. Vaccines, I mean, pretty much across the world, and again, I don't know. Nobody knows. Is it conspiracy or is it real? I mean, I think it's real because I have trust in my institutions, but it's by all measures of our standard science of what we believe to, like, I'm going to come to a rational conclusion, that was blown out the window with COVID. So, like I try to keep that in mind when I'm thinking about my spirituality too, because, again, there's all these studies that support remote viewing, and you can hold it up to people until you're blue in the face. and try to explain it to them, or if they're scientists and they read it, they would understand it. But if you don't want to believe something, you're not going to believe it.
Sure.
So at the end, as we love to think we are rational, logical creatures, and then we're not really.
Sure. Well, they're fighting their dogmas too, right? Like everyone thinks that science is this pure thing that shows evidence of support, and that this is the way that it's supposed to be. Like they are now the high priests that Bruce Lipton talks about. Like these are now the high priests, and where it used to be religion back in the day in the medieval times or whatever. The high priests of religion used to be the people of authority. Now it's the scientists. And when scientists say this is the way it is, and then that's the way it is, supposedly. But it has its own dogma too, and their own beliefs. Like and you talked about my boy, Dean Radin, his book, Real Magic, and your book, and in his book, he talks about how his publications were not being published because of the dogma that's out there in scientific journals.
Absolutely, yes. Science, I embodied it, so I know it very intimately. It's a human thing to have heuristics, to have shortcuts, like we don't know everything. Like the things that we believe, again, we didn't come to rationally. A lot of them are shortcuts. We've accepted beliefs from our culture, from the people around us, our social circles, etc. It's the same with science. We have this paradigm, the scientific materialist, Cartesian rationalist, logical positivism. This is the framework we are working with. So that's the religion. If you go against it, which is extremely anti-scientific, actually, very close-minded, and the opposite of the spirit of inquiry that science is supposed to have, you will not be published. You'll be ostracized. You'll be stigmatized and criticized. And that's why I wrote the book. Actually, is I've always been a little bit of problem with authority, and I don't like, I'm always a little bit. I don't like convention totally. So I just realized as I was doing the project that in these private, confidential conversations I was having with other scientists, they would tell me crazy stories, admit they had, some of them would say they believed in certain things. Some of them wouldn't go that far. They were careful, even though it was private. But I would say a lot of them were open, and all of us agreed that we do not have all the answers to the universe, and that any of our assumptions about time, about physics, about anything could be wrong. That if you're a well-trained scientist, you have to admit that. But in private, they admitted much more than they would publicly. And I found that in Dean Radin's work. So after I was already having these conversations with my colleagues, realizing that, and then I read Dean Radin's work, and I thought, oh my goodness, of course. Of course, and I think a lot of other researchers I've spoken to that do Psi or are interested in Psi research have mentioned that to me, that normal scientists at prestigious academic universities reach out to them all the time saying like, hey, I had this weird experience. Can you explain it to me? And they're looking for one person to be able to talk about it with, because it's so stigmatized. You can't talk about it with your colleagues at work, God forbid, So, and I found that to be the case. And I just want to push back against that, because I just think that that's so unscientific. And, Jeff Kripal at Rice University influenced me a lot. He's the chair of philosophy and religious studies there. He wrote a book called The Flip, and it's about scientists who have flipped. And he talks about, how these are really common experiences. They're common human experiences that everyone has, but we don't pay attention to them anymore. And we definitely don't talk about them anymore just because of Western culture. And what a shame, we're like missing part of our human experience, suppressing it, as well as holding actual scientific inquiry behind. So that's why I wrote the book.
I love the part in the book about Well, two things: your past life regression and your psychedelic experience. So, your past life regression, like, walk me through that. Like, was that uncomfortable for you?
Yeah, the past life regression was super interesting because I think I did it about over, I think it was definitely over a year ago. And it was kind of right in the middle of my transition. And it was right in the middle of my identity crisis. So it was not a good time for me emotionally. But yeah, I finally got to do it because, I switched therapists the week of the COVID lockdown and only met my therapist one time in person. And then we went virtual, and she wasn't doing regressions for anyone via Zoom. But I managed to convince her to do it for me a year later. And yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I meditate every day. I have been meditating for years, every morning, and I'm pretty good at, clearing my mind and letting images come in. So that part of it was easy. And she did warn me beforehand that, she was like, you're going to feel like you're making everything up, but just keep going. Just say whatever comes into your awareness. And so I did that. And I just it's the same spirit I tried to bring to everything on this journey is, like, I'm so controlling and I have so many reservations, but just fucking let it go, sorry, I hope we can cuss on
You're good.
this.
You're good.
Like, just let it go. And so I did that, and we did it, and I just told her whatever came to mind. I didn't have any intention. It was, we kind of said whatever needs to come up will come up. And I just started describing images of, like, the first thing I saw were interlocked, kind of like a Celtic symbol, and it was carved into stone. And so I told her that. And then, she's like, well, she kind of was like, okay, what else do you see? She never led me. She was just like, what do you see? Turn around, look down, look up, what do you feel? And I just slowly painted this picture of being like in this Irish farm in like the 1850s. And she asked me what I was wearing, and I looked down and I was like, oh, ew, I'm poor because I'm wearing ugly clothes. and it was just a very sad life. It was, my parents had just died at the point that I came into the life. I ended up getting married and having kids, and like we went through the whole entire life, and it was insane to me. Like, I just kept seeing images, so I would just keep telling her what I saw, and there were so many details, and it's hard if you don't, I think if you don't experience this, it's hard. Like, I always go back to my science mind, and my science mind would be like, it's your imagination, you made it up. But there's a difference between active imagination and receiving and reporting what you're seeing. And I think unless you are intimately familiar with those states, you can be skeptical. But I know that I was not actively imagining. And if I was, I definitely would not have chosen a poor Irish life. So anyway, so it was like the whole life, we went through it. And then at the end, and I was kind of like just in reporting mode. And then at the end, I died on a bed from, some illness, and my spirit floated up and into the space between lives. And she said, like, now you're going to meet with the other souls from your life. And the first one was my husband from that life. And it was so weird because like, our souls met, and then my therapist asked me, oh, what's he saying? And I was laying on the couch, not couch actually, I was laying on the couch with eye shades on and headphones, and I just started like weeping, is the only way I can describe it. I couldn't even answer her question because there was just like emotion from my stomach that came up, and I just started crying so hard. And it was that kind of emotion that, sometimes you feel sad and then you cry, but then there's other times when there's just emotion and your brain hasn't caught up. Like, it's like, why are we crying? It was one of those. And I've only had those when I get really bad. Like, if someone tells me they're sick, or when I get really bad news, it's only happened a few times in my life, of that my body reacts with the emotion, and then my brain is like, what's happening? Oh shit, we're upset. And so it was that kind of emotion, and that's what surprised me, because I've only had that a few times in my life for very, emotionally bad news. And so she asked, and I just started crying, and my conscious brain was like, why are we crying? What's happening? We don't even know this person. It's fine. You're so embarrassing. Why are you crying on the couch? My critical mind. But I couldn't stop it. And it was just so much emotion pouring out of me. And then finally, when I caught my breath, I just told her. She's like, what is he saying to you? What are you saying to him? And I just told her. And it was things like, I think I told him, oh, I'm so sorry for never showing you I loved you. Because in the life I was not affectionate, because I had like closed my heart because my parents had died when I was young. And my God, saying those words, I just was like falling apart. And it was just a very beautiful, like I felt his emotions, I felt my emotions. It was so weird. And we did it with each person in that life. Like my parents that had passed away, and I just could not stop crying. It was just overwhelming how much emotion was pouring out of me. And I got it. Like I had read all this literature, which is another thing. Like, scientists, we just read everything. And everyone kept telling me, it's one thing to read and have knowledge. It's another to experience and have wisdom. And it wasn't until that moment that I really understood that, because I kept reading about like how cathartic past life regression was, and how if you make up a story, you're not going to cry. You're not going to be able, you may or may not, but most likely you're not able to tap that kind of cathartic emotion. And it wasn't until I experienced it myself that I was like, oh man, I don't even know where that emotion came from. I've never even cried like that, like in a normal, upsetting situation. So it was very, very exceptional, a very exceptional and odd experience. And I did it a second time, and it was the same thing. Just so much emotion.
Same story?
No, it was a different life.
Hmm.
Different life. It was like, I couldn't tell if it was Greek or Roman, but it was something like that, like some sort of, white robe columns.
What about the psychedelic experience?
Psychedelics, yeah. So I've never been interested in psychedelics because I'm type A control freak scientist, but I read the literature on it when I was doing the research, and I was blown away by all the new findings of how incredibly healing they are, and which I had no idea. The narrative we inherit from our culture is psychedelics are trippy, and hippies do it, and it's dangerous for you. And so I never really even thought about psychedelics. I don't even have that many people around me. I mean, some people around me who've done it, but so when I read the literature, the healing effect of the psychedelics was incredible. Like I read science papers all the time, therapeutic studies, like the effect sizes, the percentage of participants who were being healed from like anxiety and depression, which are notoriously hard to treat, from PTSD, which has no known cure and nothing that helps really. It was incredible. Like it was honestly, any scientist who reads that, that's incredible. And I know there's a lot of work to be done. People always want to qualify. We need a lot more research. We need long-term research. We need different populations, all very true. But there has also been decades of research going on with psychedelics, even though it's not clinical. Like behavioral health therapists have been using it to heal people, and I was just blown away by that. So I also the literature on the mystical spiritual experience of it. So I obtained some LSD and had I don't recommend anyone do this, but I have a friend who's a pharmacist who works at the ICU. So I had her read the LSD handbook. I read the LSD handbook. We prepared, I'm still type A. So I set up like food and an art station for us. And we had the whole day planned. And it was just like, it was one of the best days of my life. I didn't have, I mean, I kind of had like a spiritual experience, but I've since done other psychedelics where I had like one of those where you merge with, where you are the universe. So looking back on the LSD trip, I think I thought I didn't see God or anything. It wasn't that big of a dose, but I did feel connected to everyone, and I felt overwhelming love and all of that. You know, love is all you need. That kind of thing. I definitely felt that on the LSD, and also the therapeutic insight. So, you know, with psychedelics, you can make a list of questions that you want to ask yourself. You've got your conscious brain out of the way, you have access to your subconscious, and it will tell you what you need to know. So I did that. I prepared questions. And I just kind of asked, what's my biggest problem right now? And the answer I got was, you forgot to be weird. And then like a montage of all the moments in my life where I had like betrayed like myself, like who I really am, you know, kind of like that weirdo kid you are, you know, that kind of just keeps getting told as you grow up, you know, oh, don't put your hair like that, don't be too loud, don't get a second piercing, whatever, all that stuff that you're told. Like I was just kind of shown a montage of like how that happened to me over my life. And the message was like, you forgot to be yourself and you forgot to be weird. And it was such a deep, it's what they say, it's that deep knowing, that knows. It wasn't like cognitive, like I came out of it like, oh, like you do in psychotherapy, you come out like, okay, this is the problem, I should address it. It was like an emotional, cognitive, like it was just a deep knowing, a deep, deep understanding. Nothing further was needed. I just totally got it. And I was like, that's it, going forward, I'm going to be myself. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of psychedelics now because of that. And I do think I think for the healing properties, but I think also it does help you get to that, you know, understanding of a deeper spiritual and mystical reality that I do believe is there. And you can have access to it, you know, with various things. You don't need drugs. I've also tried breath work. So I always want to be careful. I don't want to promote drugs until they're legal.
Yeah, sure. It's like, it's like, I haven't done psychedelics. I'm really, going to try the natural way of meditation and breath work before I even try to dabble in that, because I feel like if you're not prepared for that, like it shoots you into the universe and you don't know how to, you know, you'll have this experience and you won't be consciously evolved to experience it in a way that you should, you know, the best results, right? Like you might be too, I don't know, you may have handled it a lot better than I would have, right? Like I don't want to have, you know, I don't want to be able to not put back my consciousness, you know what I mean? And like,
so I also had one of those experiences where it was a difficult trip, probably the most difficult you can have. So I get that. And I do think you need a lot of preparation, a lot of support, a lot of experienced people around you. I do not recommend, for sure, I just really do not recommend people do it, you know, willy-nilly. If you don't know anything about it, I definitely recommend doing research, finding people who are experienced, you know, you need a very supportive community for sure.
you have a, I think a mailing list or something about that, right? Like you have
Yes.
something on your, how can people find that on your website?
Yeah. I write a newsletter on psychedelics, but it's not just psychedelics. I inherited it from a journalist, Erica Rex, and it was initially focused on psychedelics. So the first few ones I've done are on that, but I'm going to expand it to talk about, you know, breath work and other healing modalities and other ways of reaching non-ordinary states of consciousness. It's called The Brave New World of Psychedelic Science. It's a Substack. I can link you to it because it's a long hyperlink, but you can also go to my website. It's Phd.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter on my website.
I'm signing up for that. Mona, this has been awesome. Like you're going to have to come on in the future and we're going to have to talk neuroscience or whatever,
Absolutely.
you know, consciousness, all that stuff. I love that stuff. So
I love it. Thank you so
it's
much
gone by
for.
so quick.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.